Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview Channel 236.
On Sky, we're Channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Good morning, it's 9:30 this Monday morning and you're watching The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood. Today we'll be talking about what can be done to lower our soaring energy bills, whether Omicron can really spell the end of government restrictions on our social lives, and we'll be exploring some of that dire polling for Boris Johnson over the weekend and what it really means. All of that coming to you in a couple of minutes' time after your news.
Good morning, I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date with the latest headlines. Secondary school pupils in England are being told to take COVID tests before starting the new term. Face masks are also going to be mandatory in school for students in England for at least the next 3 weeks. Classes may also be merged if too many teachers are off sick. The new rules are being introduced by the Education Secretary to try to curb the spread of Omicron.
I want to keep Omicron out of the classroom and students in the classroom, and not for a day longer. As soon as we see that we can transition this particular variant from where we are today, where obviously London was the epicenter, but it's now rising in other parts of the country. As soon as we make sure that staff absenteeism is under control, we were at 8% at the end of last year. Then I don't want children to be wearing masks.
A legal document Prince Andrew's lawyers hope will end the civil sex case against him is going to be made public. His legal team say the case should be thrown out because of a 2009 settlement between his accuser, Virginia Giuffre, and Jeffrey Epstein. US district judges said they saw no reason to keep the until now secret agreement under seal. 2 people are missing after wildfires developed in the US. Flames in Colorado spread over an area of 9 square miles, destroying nearly 1,000 homes and buildings. Police investigating the blaze haven't ruled out arson. New NHS figures show that as we took up new hobbies in lockdown, it frequently caused a visit to hospital. As many of us took up new exploits, thousands were injured in the process. According to NHS figures, it led to hospital admissions for over 8,000 tool accidents, more than 7,000 dog bites, and over 5,000 people falling off playground equipment. You're up to date. I'll have more for you on all of the day's top stories at 10 o'clock. For now, though, The Briefing and Tom.
Welcome to the briefing. We have a lot to cover today, so let's kick off with a story that really affects our lives. Over the last few months, gas prices have been spiralling. 24 energy providers have collapsed, and there's little good news on the horizon. Well, now a group of Conservative MPs are demanding the Prime Minister take swift action to lower costs for families and businesses by both ditching VAT on energy bills and scrapping green levies. Of course, the Labour Party has also called for VAT on fuel bills to be scrapped, albeit temporarily. Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by one of those MPs leading the charge for cheaper energy bills. Lee Anderson is the Conservative MP for Ashfield, and welcome to the programme. So, first of all, these two twin measures, getting rid of the green subsidies and abolishing VAT on energy bills, how much money would that actually save a consumer?
Well, you've got to realise, Tom, this is, we've got this situation. It's not happened overnight. It's happened over many years, COVID aside. And it's not a quick fix. This is a short-term measure, if you like. That's what I think, anyway, to help people immediately to overcome their gas bills. Now, I would say it's up to it depends how much fuel you use, I suppose, in a year. But any saving is a saving for the people of Ashfield. I'm speaking to them on a daily basis who tell me now that that their gas companies have changed. This is because of the price cap. They've changed. They started with British Gas. They've gone to a smaller company, and then hey presto, 6 months later, a year later, they end up back with British Gas again, and the bills have gone up. So that's not a good position that we're in. But like I say, the environmental levy, if you like, and the VAT will make a decent saving. But then we've got to decide on what we do as a party, as a government, to make sure that fuel, domestic fuel, is more affordable in the future. And that's the real problem we face.
Would you agree with your colleague John Redwood's call this morning to start exploring our own natural gas resources in the UK? Of course, the EU has just declared natural gas as somewhat of a green fuel. They'll be importing it from Russia, but we do have big reserves under our country. Would you support hydraulic fracturing to get that gas out and lower bills potentially in the medium term?
Yes, I would, Tom. I mean, I come from a red wall seat. We're what I class as like dirty towns, really. We're brought up on coal mining, big industry, and we have this in our DNA. And, you look over the pond in the US, they're fracking, their shale gas is a fraction of the cost for domestic users as what gas is in this country. We're importing gas from Norway, from around the world, or from around Europe, should I say, and it's costing us an absolute fortune. Look, we've closed all our coal mines. We're reluctant to frack. We're reluctant to get oil out the North Sea. And guess what's happened? It's not rocket science. Our gas prices are going up, and we are now a hostage to other countries who are supplying our energy. It's absolute madness.
Now, Russia has clearly exacerbated this energy crisis in Europe in particular, putting pressure on Germany and others to try and approve this Nord Stream 2 pipeline. To what extent is a lot of this out of our control as a country, if we're really at the beck and call of these global forces, and particularly as the beck and call as to whether Mr. Putin likes us very much?
Well, you're right, Tom. It is out of our control. But what is in our control is domestic production. I see no reason now. The pandemic, we're coming out of the pandemic. It's brought it to our attention more. And people are going to notice more and be more vocal once they get their next bills in February, March time, once they're seeing extra cash on there. So now we have to have the debate. Shall we explore, like you said, fracking, extra oil production, make sure that we have to be self-sufficient in this country. And I think in the past, what we've done is we've put the cart before the horse. Like I say, shut all our pits. We've stopped, we're slowing down oil production. We're very reluctant, whilst we're on this green journey, to explore fossil fuels more in this country. And as a result of that, the poorer people in my community are going to be paying through the nose, and that's unacceptable.
Now, of course, we did host COP26 in Glasgow in November. There was an agreement that was reached by the whole world. There are many measures within that agreement, and generally, the British public, according to most polls, seem to be relatively supportive of trying to reach net zero by 2050. They think it's an admirable goal, and certainly the Prime Minister seems to think that as well. Do you agree with him?
Yeah, I think it's admirable. And, I've done some polling in my own constituency. And when you ask people the question, 95% of people agree with what government's trying to achieve. But what they don't agree with, Tom, is how we're doing it. Whilst we're transitioning, we should be sensible. Fossil fuels, nobody wants to use fossil fuels, but they should be seen now as a necessary evil while we transition over the next 30, 40, 50 years, however long it's going to take. So let's use them. Let's get them out of the ground in this country. Let's use them while we're transitioning, and hopefully we can have a sensible energy policy where people can actually afford to heat their homes.
Interesting point there. I wonder, just finally, how receptive do you think the government is to this push? Obviously, a number of former ministers are behind this campaign as well, Red Wall MPs like yourself. Is the government listening?
I hope so, Tom. I mean, I've done a little bit of polling this morning on one of my private social media groups, and 90% of the people are saying that they would agree to fracking and fossil fuels in the short term whilst we transition to bring energy bills down. Now, it's all right for MPs like me. I'm earning 80-odd grand. That's a little bit less than what you're earning a year, Tom. I can afford to pay my gas bill and my electric bill. I get my transport paid to and from London every week, so I'm comfortable. But I've been that person in Nashfield who's been on minimum wage with a couple of kids on my own and had that prepayment meter, and I know it's like to put a fiver's worth of gas in on a Sunday night and be watching that meter all week long.
Well, Lee Anderson, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Just one thing, Tom, before you go.
Important point. Yes.
Just one thing before you go. Fasten your button up, young man, and put a tie on.
Oh, you know what? My boss will absolutely love you for saying that. Absolutely. Well, Lee Anderson, we always appreciate your straight talking here. Do you know what? Write in to GBNews at gbviews@gbnews.uk if you agree with Lee. Let's find out what the audience thinks. Should I wear a tie? We can see that for tomorrow. Now, I want to take a look at a tale of two newspapers, The Times in England and The Times in Scotland. The Scottish edition goes with gatherings likely to be banned well into the spring. And the English variety splashes with ministers confident new curbs not needed. Totally contradictory headlines in one part of the United Kingdom versus the other. Well, which is right? On the one hand, national COVID hospital patients are up by 68% in 1 week. We saw confirmed cases breach 200,000 a day over Christmas, and while they have since fallen, there is likely a reporting delay over this unusual holiday weekend. And these cases will not show up in hospitals for 1 or 2 weeks. Meanwhile, 1 in 10 NHS staff are off sick on New Year's Eve. The isolation crisis is biting hospitals, with United Lincolnshire Hospitals Trust last night declaring a critical incident with what it said was unprecedented staff shortages and compromised care. On the other hand, of course, it looks like cases have plateaued in London. They may well have turned a corner elsewhere too. And as I said endlessly in December, any measures introduced in January will arguably be too late to shift the dial if the peak comes before they take effect. The hospitalisations we see over the next 2 weeks are already baked in. There's nothing we can do about them. And they may be the worst of it. South Africa, of course, saw a natural crash in its Omicron caseload, and far from introducing new restrictions, it's now winding down many of its COVID measures. And away from epidemiology, the political context in England, at least, appears to have swung against restrictions. Labour politicians like Andy Burnham and Tony Blair have come out against further lockdowns. A 100-strong Tory rebellion on Plan B would likely only grow in the face of harsher proposals too. And after 2 years of COVID in the UK, with this disease stretching across 4 calendar years now, many are beginning to say, if not now, when? Is it time to end the era of government restrictions on our social lives? Well, Christopher Snowdon is Head of Lifestyle Economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs, and he joins me now. Welcome to the programme, Christopher. You've been a pretty optimistic voice in the course of Omicron. Are you concerned at all about the next 2 weeks and whether this caseload that we've seen over the last week will translate into some serious problems in hospitals?
Well, the NHS is going to have a very tough month in January. It generally does, to be fair. Winter crises are nothing new to the NHS. They are an annual event. But yeah, this particular month is going to be tougher than usual, partly because we have so many operations built up that have been due over the course of the last 2 years. And so the NHS, of course, is trying to get through all those as well. And it's quite possible they're going to have to cancel some or postpone some elective surgery, as indeed they did last year, as indeed actually again they actually do most winters. But in terms of getting to such a level that we need to introduce lockdowns or further restrictions, no, absolutely not. I think the government is actually fairly sanguine about this, and even the BBC is fairly sanguine about this, and many people within the NHS, aside from some rather hysterical voices on Twitter, NHS chiefs seem to think that things could be going a hell of a lot worse. So yeah, well, of course we've seen this rise in hospitalisations, but you know, the Office of National Statistics last week said that 2.3 million people have the virus, and there are 12,000 of them in hospital, of whom actually about 4,000 are not even there treated primarily for COVID. So effectively, you've got 8,000 people in hospital. We had a peak of well over 30,000 last January. The question is, will we get to that peak again, or will we go beyond it? I just don't think it's plausible. Already we're seeing the number of people in hospital with COVID, let alone, you know, being treated for COVID, has started to slow down. Long may that continue. We know that Omicron is a really much milder variant of the virus, and that we are going to see, as South Africa did, much lower death rates than we've seen in the past. And ICU, intensive care, is not filling up at all. So the people going to hospital are going in with a milder disease. They're coming out sooner, we think. And so this simply isn't anything like last January, and people need to get out of that mindset.
Now, you're someone that's been following the situation in South Africa relatively closely. Can you talk us through exactly what appears to have happened there and why that country is now rolling back restrictions despite being the epicentre of Omicron?
Well, of course, this is where Omicron came from, we think. In November, the eyes of the world were on South Africa, and the eyes of the world are no longer on South Africa at all, because what happened was you had a big spike in infections, its fourth wave, in actual fact, which was nearly all Omicron, and then the numbers just started falling, and they've fallen by more than half in the last few weeks, which in itself is interesting. But more importantly, the spike in deaths has been just nothing like in the previous 3 waves. You can very easily find this information online. You can look at the difference between these 4 waves. They're all about the same size in terms of the number of cases, but it's barely a pimple in terms of the amount of mortality. So it's really good news. We've had this confirmed in various studies now from various places, but there is no doubt whatsoever that Omicron is intrinsically weaker. It's a great blessing that it is, by the way, because it's so much more transmissible. We really would be in serious trouble, I think, if it was as deadly as Delta, but it's not. We've got more than 90% of people over the age of 50 boosted. And so the question is, as you say, if not now, then when? Because one of the issues, unfortunately, with the boosters is they do wane, and they wane quite a lot over the course of 10 weeks. So really, we time things quite nicely in the sense that so many people have just been boosted. The government has responded, I think, very well by really upping their game on the booster program. And so, of course, you're going to still see some unvaccinated people in hospital. You will see, of course, some vaccinated people too. But it's not looking like we're going to be in anything like the same situation as last year in terms of intensive care use, certainly not in terms of deaths. I think some of the models that have been bandied around recently by SAGE have been more ridiculous than anything they've done in the past. And I think that things are looking relatively good. And it's relative is the key word there, because Omicron was a real shock. It's a real problem. It has set us back, but it hasn't set us back to the extent that we need to start bringing in new restrictions on liberty.
And I suppose that is the crucial point there. Of course, it's going to put pressure on the NHS, but I suppose the political decision is what constitutes pressure enough to restrict people's lives, and this doesn't appear, hopefully, to be reaching that threshold or anywhere close to it. Well, Christopher Snowdon, thank you very much for joining us this morning on The Briefing. Really interesting analysis there, as always. Now, secondary school pupils in England will be wearing masks in the classroom from this week, but not their teachers. Earlier on Breakfast, Eamon and Isabel spoke to the Education Secretary, Nadeem Zwahi, on his plans to keep schools open even as COVID cases surge.
99.9% of schools were open at the end of last year, and I'm certain they'll do a brilliant job with the testing that we're asking them to do this first week back. I made sure we had enough test kits because we have an alternative route to provide those. You and I would be having a different conversation if I hadn't. And of course, I've also announced, as part of Plan B, you'll recall, we had mask wearing in communal parts in schools the guidance we've suggested is that just whilst Omicron is surging, that students in secondary schools wear masks in the classroom. It's not ideal. We know that the best place for children is to be in school with their friends, learning in front of a teacher. I want to keep Omicron out of the classroom and students in the classroom, and not for a day longer. As soon as we see that we can transition this particular variant from where we are today, where obviously London was the epicenter, but it's now rising in other parts of the country. As soon as we make sure that staff absenteeism is under control, we were at 8% at the end of last year. Then I don't want children to be wearing masks. In fact, I've also asked my team in the department to look at doing a piece of research for the longer term as to the impact of wearing masks in classroom would have on students and on their ability to learn. The UK Health and Security Agency, because of Omicron and because how much more infectious it is, recommended it. We did a piece of work in the department, an observational study with 123 schools which did have masks in classroom, and actually I will share the evidence with Parliament in the next 48 hours on this, and some of the evidence from other countries like Germany. It's one measure of a number of measures. Testing next week this week, forgive me, is really important. And of course the CO2 monitors. I delivered 350,000 CO2 monitors, and because some schools, especially the special schools and alternative provision, may not be able to mitigate for ventilation, I've got 7,000 air purifiers also available for those schools who can't mitigate. I can now see that we probably need the 7,000 air purifiers for those schools who can't easily mitigate, which is why I've made them available to those schools. So I think it's a combination of making sure you've got the data in the first place. I've always said I'll be the evidence-led Secretary of State. That's what I've done throughout my whole career, both in business and in politics. And the evidence suggests that from the CO2 monitoring we've done, that what we've now bought, the 7,000, is about the right number. If other schools need them and they don't qualify for them, I've also set up a marketplace. I announced it at the end of last year, where they can order additional air purifiers as well.
Education Secretary Nadeem Zwahi there, speaking to Breakfast a little bit earlier. Well, the Prime Minister has entered the new year on a low of 16 points to be exact. A Delta poll survey of 57 constituencies gained by the Conservatives in the 2019 general election puts Labour on 49% in those constituencies, and the Conservatives trailing behind on just 33%. The poll suggests that if a general election were to be held tomorrow, the Tories could lose 100 seats, putting Sir Keir Starmer in Downing Street. This, of course, follows an appalling final 2 months of 2021 for the Tories. First, an own goal, or should I say Owen goal, over the Owen-Paterson affair, then a rolling scandal over wine and cheese, and an enormous backlash rebellion over Plan B measures. Well, can the Prime Minister turn it around, and how bad are things really? Well, I'm delighted to be joined by the Conservative commentator and former Boris Johnson advisor, Tim Montgomery. Welcome to the programme, Tim. This is a pretty extraordinary crash in the polls over the last 2 months, although we usually see a dip in the polls around mid-term governments. Is this to be expected, or is this something unusual?
I think it is unusual, Tom, in the extent that it's bigger than most mid-term variations. But of course, we live in an extraordinary time in politics. You know, this is the time when Donald Trump becomes president of the United States. You know, Britain votes for Brexit. Jeremy Corbyn becomes Labour leader. And, you know, a few years ago, almost pipped Theresa May to the post. You know, just before Christmas, you mentioned Owen-Paterson. We had the North Shropshire by-election, where a constituency that was completely opposed to what the Liberal Democrats stood for at the last general election suddenly voted for a Liberal Democrat candidate. So I don't want to understate the Prime Minister's difficulties. I think they're real. I think they're considerable. But I think we're living, the hallmark of our age is volatility. Voters are, I think, desperate around the world for substantial change. And if the people that they put in power don't deliver that change, they will do and vote for almost anyone else to register their disapproval. And I think what Boris Johnson is seeing at the moment is a real slap on the face, if you like, from voters who are saying to him, who are saying to Conservative MPs in the Conservative government, we voted for you to make a difference, and you are looking like you are self-indulgent. And that is, the challenge for Boris Johnson. It's the challenge for Conservative MPs. Can they prove that they have an agenda for the British people? The problem they have is that time is running out.
It's fascinating. I was looking at the record of the coalition government just over the Christmas period. And my gosh, I mean, there was welfare reform, education reform, the deficit was halved. I could go on. There were substantial changes that really affected the country, even a few privatisations and tax cuts to be thrown in there. And that was a government with a much smaller majority than this one. And this government doesn't seem to be doing all that much. How does Boris Johnson turn this around at the start of this year?
Well, that would be my absolute, what you fastened on, Tom, is absolutely would be my critique of this government. And I think they can still win the next general election. But what is their reform agenda? Now, they will say they've had the COVID pandemic to cope with, and so forth. They may not have had the agenda that you sort of rightly point out the coalition had, but they said, they've been distracted. My concern, my question is more, well, even before the pandemic struck, it wasn't obvious that big things like the levelling up agenda, which supposedly is the flagship agenda of this government, really had any definition. Even now, we've had Michael Gove in that job for 6 months or so. We've had Boris Johnson give continuous speeches on levelling up. And I, follow politics very closely. You follow politics very closely. I'm still really not sure what levelling up is. And so I struggle to know quite what my advice would be for this government, but it certainly has to be to show people you have a vision for the future of this country and you have a route plan to get there. At the moment, I have no idea really what that is.
Big challenges for the Prime Minister coming up. It's a wonder to see whether he'll do personnel changes, whether there'll be some big announcement. Just in the last few seconds here on the programme, do you expect any big announcements this month?
Well, I hope so. I think they need to show the country and the parliamentary party that they get the gravity of the situation that they're in. This is an unpopular government that is going downhill. They need to show that they get that and that they have a plan to turn it around. And I look forward to seeing that. I have no idea what it is, Tom.
Well, Tim Montgomery, on that bleak point, thank you for joining me and indeed for closing the programme here. This is the end of the briefing today. Coming up, it's To The Point with Mercy Moroki and me standing in for Patrick Christie's. Stick with us, so we'll be on that in a few minutes' time. But first, here is your weather forecast.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Well, looking ahead to today's weather, and the UK is looking showery for many, with colder air working its way southwards over northern areas. Let's take a look at some of the details. Well, many of the showers should have eased from southwest England, but it will be a generally cloudy and breezy picture with rain not too far off the south coast. A similar story for London and the southeast, with a fair amount of dry, if rather cloudy weather around on Monday lunchtime. Still on the mild side, though. Scattered showers will be affecting much of Wales, with brightest weather further north and cloudier skies in the south. Temperatures there up to around 11 Celsius. Then bright skies for much of the Midlands, though a few showers are likely towards Herefordshire and Shropshire. Temperatures there at lunchtime up to around 9 or 10 Celsius for many areas, with a brisk southwesterly wind. Some sunshine for much of Yorkshire, but we'll run into thicker cloud towards County Durham and Northumberland, with some patchy rain arriving on the scene by lunchtime. Temperatures by now back into single figures. And the weather front bringing about the change to colder weather that will be sat over central and southern Scotland at lunchtime, with temperatures continuing to fall throughout the afternoon. And that same weather front will then be making inroads into the north of Ireland, but at this stage it should still be dry and perhaps quite bright for Belfast and Armagh. Rain and hill snow coming south into northern England this evening and becoming very windy with snow showers in northern Scotland. And that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of your bank holiday Monday.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview Channel 236.
On Sky, we're Channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might